Hey guys, Tanner here. Today I want to talk about the book The Liberal Virus by Amin. And I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. So I found this book in, of all places, a Goodwill outside of my campus and was intrigued about it almost immediately. So I got back into my dorm and Googled this motherfucker. And we'll tell you a bit of info about him before we get to the meat of the sandwich. Amin, born September 3rd, 1941 to August 12th, 2018. By the way, was an Egyptian-French Marxian economist, political scientist, and world systems analyst. This man sounds like my dream man, to be honest, if I wasn't asexual. He's noted for his introduction of the term Eurocentrism in '88, which, for the sake of the length of this video time, we will not be getting into unless need be. He also is considered a pioneer of dependency theory, which we will not be getting into for the sake of my community. With that being said, let us get into this book. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. It means the world to me. In the introduction of the book, Amin says that in the 19th century, the world suffered an ideological virus known as the liberal virus. Amin says the virus caused its victims a curious schizophrenia, and that essentially humans developed two lives, the social and the economic. The rules in these two lives overlap and do not matter according to Amin, but they so very much matter to the ones living in said lives. This is why he calls it a curious schizophrenia, as it is merely an illusion justified by some imaginary power within. Weird how that happens. Amin proposes that unfortunately Fukuyama was right when he said that liberalism announced the end of world history. That means that history is over? Oh my god, half my studies are gone, and thank you, Jesus. Or Bob, or whoever. Thank you, Amin. However, Amin suggests that all of humanity perished in the Holocaust, which when thinking about it, it does bring into question, why hasn't America really changed for the better, much like Europe did after World War II? Perhaps liberalism is the end of history. Amin goes on to suggest in a really existing capitalism, class struggle, politics, and the logics of capital accumulation are inseparable, that the idea or concept of deregulation of the markets have no base in reality, as the markets themselves just have no regulation mechanism. So I guess that means that Reaganomics never happened? No. Unfortunately, this means that Reagan was the purest capitalist president, and every president after has been Reagan the sequel, except for Obama, who was cool black Reagan. Amin says that the idea that there exists an economic logic, which economic science enables us to discover, something that governs the development of capitalism, is an illusion. But Tanner, to insinuate that everything our system has to offer is merely an illusion, isn't that a little conspiratorial? To that question, I give you this quote. There is no theory of capitalism distinct from its history. Theory and history are indissociable, just as our economics and politics. Thank you, Amin, for answering my question, but have you considered that I am doing it wrong and that capitalism is cringe? Argument ended. Guess you never thought of that, loser. Seriously though, when we talk about capitalism and political science and economics, we have no real base for it other than, we've had it for so long, so we might as well just keep it, which is an unacceptable excuse for anyone older than 14 years old to have. Systems change. Humans change those systems. Nothing more, nothing less. Amin goes on to say that pure economics expresses the exacerbation of the economism of bourgeois social thought. And yeah, for the record, I can spell bourgeois and bourgeoisie, so... Furthermore, Amin adds, economics thus becomes a discourse which is no longer engaged in known reality. Its function is no more than to legitimize capitalism by attributing its intrinsic qualities, which it cannot have. You'll often hear, like, capitalism breeds innovation. But Tanner, capitalism does breed innovation. Look at my iPhone that I have. It's always been the thing that gave me my new doodad. No, actually it was people, and more specifically workers, who gave you that doodad through this crazy idea that humans inherently create things to adapt to their settings in which they live. called technology. Humans create technology, not systems. The end of this, though, goes a bit like, in order to develop effective strategies, social movements must liberate themselves from these confusions. For further reading on the subject, I recommend Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I think I said that wrong, by Paulo Freire, link in the description. For the sake of time, for time's sake, Pedagogy of the Oppressed develops a theory of education fitted to the needs of the disenfranchised and marginalized members of capitalist societies. Again, great read, but not what we're talking about today. Perhaps another time. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah. Later on, Amin says that the market, which refers by nature to competition, is not capitalism. Capitalism is defined precisely by the limits to competitions that the monopoly or oligarchy, or in simpler terms, the exclusion of others from private property. Basically, you know how in America almost everything is owned by Jeffrey Bezos or Disney or some other corporate scum? Oh, and Elon Musk. Well, those monopolies do not allow for any competition, which eliminates the need for a market, as there literally isn't one. Yeah, that's what Amin's talking about. He even goes further to say that really existing capitalism is the opposite of even the imaginary market. That's terrifying, right? Like, I'm not the only one who thinks that. But that makes sense when you consider the fictional depictions of pure capitalism, like Cyberpunk or Blade Runner, literally having corporations become the shadow government as their only logical step in terms of competition for a monopoly would naturally be the governing power that is. Moving on from that nightmarish thought, but Tanner, that would never happen in America. There's already talks in the UN about giving Elon Musk a seat. It's kind of already happening. But Tanner, a humanist approach is only utopian and only a fantasy that you silly commie anarchist lefty dummies have. Indulge in my huge brained takes. Well, Amin suggests that the project of a humanist response to the challenge of capitalism's globalized expansion is by no means utopian. On the contrary, it is the only possible realistic project, in the sense that the beginning of an evolution towards such a response could rapidly win over powerful social forces capable of imposing logic on it. So this is where we may get into some controversial opinions, especially to the edgy college kids that I hang around with. So, hot take, I guess, basically postmodernism is not as cool of an ideology as you think it is. There, I said it, let it sink in, let it bubble, but I have a reason, and the reason is pretty damn good. Amin explains that postmodernism-based discourse is an ideological accessory that in the end legitimizes liberalism and invites us to submit to it. Remember, folks, liberalism is all about consumption and individualism. While individuality is completely fine, we must be wary of how individually we act, as we can lose our sense of humanity. See American Psycho's Patrick Bateman, for example. He's so individualistic that he does not consider himself a human. To Ayn Rand, he's the perfect male, but to everyone else, he's a fucking psycho. As Amin says, postmodern discourse is satisfied with submitting the impoverished propositions of liberal American ideology for a truth critique. Live with your time, adapt to it, manage each day, that is, abstain from reflecting on the nature of the system, particularly from calling into question its choices of the moment. Moving on, as I don't want to upset my fellow postmodern neo-Marxists, moving on. Amin says that since democracy is founded on the possibility of making an alternate choice, that there is no longer a need for democracy, because, and I quote, ideology made up the idea that there is no alternative acceptable, end quote. Furthermore, he adds that, quote, democratic practice is thus emptied of all content and the way to open for what he calls an empty or limited democracy. End quote. Basically, an empty democracy is when electoral malnutrition happens, when major players take the role as celebrities for the political people, for the society of the spectacle. It's all about the spectacle in this liberal society. This eventually will delegitimize democracy as we know it, allowing for politics to be undone and a general drift in potential power that inherently numbs the meaning and coherence of societal projects. You know how, people were like, Biden is the most progressive candidate since FDR, yet Biden has literally done nothing that. But Tanner, that would never happen in America as our democracy is solidly tight. This might have been a reasonable assumption prior to Ronald Reagan, but in the year 2022, this is just an unacceptable excuse for anyone above the age of 14 to have. I don't care about your education status. It's unacceptable. Amin says that the world system has not entered into a non-imperialism-based system. Actually, the opposite has happened, as it is by nature an imperialism system exacerbated to the extreme, effectively extracting resources from without any main effective opposition. In fact, according to the text, global expansion of capitalism, because of its polarizing effects, always implies the political intervention of the dominant powers that are the states of the system's center and the societies of the dominated periphery. But Tanner, name some countries that get affected in this manner. Okay, that's easy. Bolivia, Peru, Portugal, India, Ukraine, Chile, the Philippines, and the list goes on and on and on and on for you see. Basically every country that is not a superpower is exploited by said superpowers in this system. Furthermore, Amin adds that the globalized liberal economic order requires permanent war military-style interventions, endlessly succeeding one another as the only means to submit the people to the periphery to its demands. What? No, shut the fuck up. This is an incredibly relevant quote, as we are currently about to invade a fucking country for this very reason. Don't butt Tanner me on this one. We literally just pulled out of Afghanistan, a war which was all about extracting oil, which killed hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Shut the fuck up. Amin says that the new imperialism truly has a center, what he calls a triad. This triad is Europe, America, and Japan, and the center in that triad aspires to exercise its hegemonic power, and yes, that country trying this is the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, the United States of America, baby. Let's go, America, fuck yeah. Amin says the systemic implementations of military control over the planet by the US expresses quite brutally and literally this imperialistic reality. Remember, folks, we all learned this in middle school. The end goal of imperialism is total control of the world by a sovereignty. And I do not think it would be a hot take to say that America very much tries and does this as much as they feasibly can, and in many ways is imperialistic. To Amin, the function of liberal American society is to deceive us and cause us to forget the extent of the true challenges and the struggles required to respond to them. Capitalism has developed the productive forces at a pace and to an extent unparalleled in all prior history. And to Amin, this means that the scientific level and technological knowledge attained today makes it possible to resolve all of humanity's material problems. Now, pause on that for a bit. I want to talk about the post-scarcity world for a bit, as that's what he's talking about, for those who don't know. For what I'll be referencing an article from the website Less Wrong, my username LSUSR, written on the 30th of October 2021. So, to sum up history as densely as I can, humanity has basically hovered on the edge of starvation up until really the last 100 years, even the 50 years, I'd argue. Most wars have ultimately been fought over land because land determines food production, and food production was a matter of life and death. If you went back in time and asked an ancient person what a magical post-scarcity society looked like, he or she would describe a world with lots of food. Quote, I am come down to deliver them out of the land of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and a large land, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. From Exodus chapter 3, verse 18 from the King James Bible. In ancient times, post-scarcity society meant a world with enough food for everybody. I live in America. I can buy 50 pounds of rice for $50. If I ate nothing but rice, it would cost me $450 per year. Not a nice lifestyle, but I'm still surviving. The US GDP per capita is roughly $64,000. By the standards of medieval Japan, we have 100 times the economic production of what people need. Thrift stores throw away clothes more comfortably than all other stores, but the finest of medieval silks. That's what I'm comparing it to. Like, more comfortable than all but the finest medieval silks. The internet provides higher quality information and entertainment for literally free than anything available in medieval times. Smallpox is extinct. Our norm of what constitutes as basic life necessities has expanded. It includes healthcare, meat, milk, soap, sewage, hot running water, education, internet, cars, and nice clothes, half of which were unimaginable to medieval peasants. The whole package can be bought for less than half the US per capita GDP. However, just because there's enough to go around does not mean it actually goes around. As we know, many people, a lot of children are starving in a society which has the means to feed them. As a result, we are essentially throwing away millions of lives a year because it's not economically effective, as econ majors say, to fucking feed people. Furthermore, post-scarcity doesn't necessarily mean lots of stuff, just that we don't count it. There's an episode of Doctor Who, and we're in the future. There's a space station. People thought about money and distances and how much oxygen tanks would take. Living on that planet, living on planet Earth, I do not count how many breaths I take. It doesn't mean that I breathe in an infinite amount of oxygen. If I wanted to, I could breathe more, and theoretically, it would give me a little more brain cycles. I can theoretically accelerate the brain power that I'm using by breathing faster, but it's not a relevant constraint, so I don't keep fucking count of it, as neither should you. In wartime, when you go buy food, you might be limited to food stamps. Rationing is effective. Then food supplies won't become scarce. Wood. During peace, people are less concerned whether you are overeating or not. Or, like your doctor rather than your milk seller cares. With the internet, we used to pay per data transfer. Now it is more common to pay for speed. In that regard, we have moved to literally post-scarcity data amounts. Everybody gets infinite data as long as they don't hog the bandwidth from others. Interpersonal competition is not the most natural part of the economy. If we systemically outlawed pay to win, then the coupling would be significantly lessened. And it's already the case that arenas that enforce quality are better status grabs than where you could influence the outcome by outside factors. Boxing is by weight class. Most motor sports have technical rulings, which mean expensive parts don't confer an Alamo win to advantage. We are totally in a mode where advantages in one field are mostly convertible to advantages in other fields, rather than empowering humans to the point where personal fit or aptitude would be the relevant limiters. Does that make any sense when I say post-scarcity world, and when Amin says that we could solve this issue? Now, this does not mean that peasants would just poof away, unfortunately. According to Amin, at this present time, the agricultural and peasant world still make up about half of humanity. Peasants, whether we admit it or not, support nearly half of humanity, roughly 3 billion people. That's something we can't just take away in one swing, which is unfortunate. Amin says it is necessary to preserve peasant agriculture for the visible future of the 21st century. His reasoning is not that it's romantic nostalgia for the past, but quite simply that the solution to the problem is found by moving past the logic of capitalism and instead moving towards and transitioning towards a utilitarian socialist world. Yes! I knew I was going to end up saying that word. I fucking love Samir Amin. To him, we have to, quote, de-link internal prices from those of the world market as they should be by increasing the productivity of peasant agriculture, which is just slow as can be, but continual. thereby allowing control over the population transfer from the countryside towards the cities, end quote. He proposes through interregional agreements between countries this could be achieved. So, after World War II, there was a massive shift in almost every aspect of our society and like the rest of the world's society. And I wonder why. Amin says that the popular classes or working classes benefited from the end of World War II from an exceptional situation based on the historic compromise the working classes forced on capital. This compromise basically ensured job security for the majority of workers in Fordist organized facilities, Fordism being like assembly line-based jobs. To Amin, the social transformation in the latter 20th century can be summarized as, quote, the proportion of the working classes in a precarious position has gone from less than a quarter to more than half the global urban population, and this phenomenon of pauperization has reappeared on a significant scale in the developed centers themselves, end quote. You gotta love when how big-brained lads can just make the most complicated issues sound so simple. Gotta love it. This man really is like the Carl Sagan of Marxist economics. Not that Sagan himself wasn't a Marxist, but we don't talk about that. Now this liberal virus, as Amin calls it, which pollutes contemporary social thought and eliminates the capacity to understand the world, let alone transform it, has profoundly penetrated the whole of the historical left formed in the aftermath of the Second World War, for the movements engaged at the present times in social struggles for another world, a better one granted, and an alternative globalization will only be able to produce significant social advantages if they get rid of the virus in order to begin an authentic theoretical debate again. This is something that I think Amin does not think is possible, as he says, quote, 150 years ago, Marx initiated the analysis of the mechanisms underlying this connection, an analysis which has hardly been pursued since, end quote. Oh, by the way, it says your daily shield to read Capital by Karl Marx. Eye-opening how extremely relevant it is, especially in the world of NFTs. But Tanner, we can just vote comrades into a bourgeois democracy, right? Right? Oh, little one. If only you knew. Democracy is a modern concept in the sense that it defines modernity itself, understood as the adoption of the principle that human beings, individually and collectively, that is socially, of course, are responsible for their own history. But Tanner, what the fuck does that mean? Well, according to Amin, the modernity in question is born with capitalism, and the democracy that it produces remains as limited as capitalism is. Its historical bourgeois forms, the only ones known in practice until today, form only one stage. In other words, modernity and the democracy that encompasses it do not form a stable state of affairs. They are, how do you say, incomplete processes. There has never been a purely democratic society, and most likely there never will be, as that takes up too much time to decide crucial things. For example, food production. To Amin, in a capitalist society, democracy must necessarily be restricted, reserved for those who are both citizens and property owners. When this happens, the political loses its autonomy, in this convergence with the economic. To Amin, economic alienation clearly functions here to hide the elimination of the autonomy of the political. Earlier we talked about empty or low-density democracy, and I want to bring that up to make sure you're paying attention. In a low-density democracy, you are free to vote as you choose. Red, white, blue, green, pink, black, I don't fucking care. It doesn't matter. This has no effect on your fate, as your fate is decided elsewhere, outside the parliament and inside the market. To Amin, this is why the rotation of those in government, notice not those in power, is always called upon to do the same thing, that is, obey the market. This has been taken the place of the alternative, that is, a clear choice between socially different options and perspectives. What does that mean, though? After all, that's wordy and like big-brained. Well, from my understanding, that means that positions in power might change, but the real ones in power, that being CEOs of business, don't change, and in order to maintain the way things are, people will run as progressive candidates and get nothing done, just to obey the market. On this, does that make a bit more sense? On the subject of socialism, he said, a quote, "If socialism cannot be conceived without democracy, democratization in a socialist perspective implies that there is some progress being made in democracy's conflict with capitalist logic," end quote. In other words, there is no socialism without democracy, no democratic progress without the socialist perspective. Having a true democracy means escaping the liberal dogma. To Amin, this is an inescapable condition failing which democracy becomes ridiculous, or put simply, means to ensure the one-sided dictator of capital. This is why China is not a socialist democracy, as they are a dictatorship of capital. This is also known as state capitalism, and most of the socialist countries in the world, except for like a few, fall under state capitalism. The next bits are going to get funky, so strap in for this, please. There are not really any separate Democrat and Republican parties. Yeah, you heard that right. I said it. Amin goes on for pages about this, but the gist of it is that each party represents capital, and that's their only interest. Basically, what follows after this is Amin's solution to the issue he sees as the liberal virus. But I'm not going to spoil that for you, as I want you to read this book. If you are intrigued by this book, I will provide a link in the description for a PDF of it. Thank you so much for watching this video. It has meant a lot to me, as I cherish this book near and dear, even though I've had it for like a day. If you want to support me, please consider checking out my Patreon and the link in the description. And as always, solidarity forever. It's a Tanner Show, a Schlamma Show, signing off. As always, have a good one.